Hello and welcome to the English for Engineers podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Augustin. Join me on my podcast as I dig deep into all things technical English, business English, and international engineering to bring you a lifetime of knowledge in a digestible form. And today I have, as every time, another special guest. Saskia Slotboom is her name. And she's a special guest because we have kind of a parallel career, meaning that we both started out as engineers and we are both in training and coaching now. Saskia works as a coach and trainer with professionals in STEM fields, and she's working with them on soft skills, meaning communication, influencing, public speaking, and personal leadership. And as a former project manager, Saskia knows from experience that we need those additional skills to succeed in our careers. But Saskia, I can talk about you all day long, but I think it's better you introduce yourself to the listeners. Thanks for being here and thanks for being on a podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited. So I do work with professionals in STEM fields, so that's engineers and other people in technical professions or surroundings. And I do work with them on all different skills that have to do with how do you bring your message across, but also how do you work together with people? How do you communicate? How well do you know yourself? Do you know your patterns and your triggers and what happens and what's really handy about them and what's maybe not so handy?
Practical.
I don't know, handy is the word, but in Dutch we would say handig.
Yeah. Was not that good to have them?
Or constructive, when
Yeah.
some qualities that you have are really helpful in a lot of situations, and in some situations they might be a little bit less. So I love working with engineers. Yeah, it might be actually not costing you. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
so that's what I do as a trainer with groups, as a coach with individuals, and sort of hybrid forms in between.
Interesting. So I have, of course, been on your website. Yes. And there on your website, it says, where do I have it? You're talking about betas. You say you're training betas. And when I read it, I was like, with my Austrian and English mixed mind, I was like, that's not nice to say we're working with betas because we all want to be alphas. So, but I know there's a different meaning to it. Can you please explain to us what you mean with a beta?
Yes. So in Dutch, it is, or used to be, it might be changing because of the international influence, but it used to be quite common to call people that will be in academical fields that were more like language or law related, or to call them alphas, like that would be alpha studies. And then betas would be more the math and the engineering and the physics, and that will be beta studies. So it's quite common to say beta people or alpha people. And I've had this misunderstanding before because I had met an American coach once, and she was also like, how can you classify people like this?
Yeah,
but I didn't understand back then that she had a totally different translation actually for that concept. So I try whenever I work internationally to say people in STEM fields, because the beta thing doesn't really translate very well.
No, it has a completely different meaning or context in English. Yeah, true. So what in Dutch is called a beta field, that would be STEM fields in English.
I think so.
More or less.
So, yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, yeah, now that makes sense. So now your headline makes way more sense to me. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself personally, maybe? How did you start out as an engineer? What was your initial thought of becoming an engineer? And what was your way towards coaching? How did you end up here where you are now?
This is a long story. I'll try to keep it to the highlights, but I love telling my stories, so let me know.
Go on.
If I, how do you say it, go a little bit off the track a little bit. So when I was like 16, 17, I thought psychology is super interesting and architecture is super interesting. my parents thought I was maybe talented because I would make all these patterns in my drawings and in my block building when I was a small child. This was actually pattern seeking and not creative design, I found out later. But I went to Delft in the end. My math and my physics were okay. And my dean was like, oh, I think the study advisor actually was like, I think you could really be an engineer. And the psychology part, I sort of let go of that. And then I went to study architecture. And then I found out that the creative designing, hand sketching part of it was really not my thing. I was more into the building physics and the and courses like that, and also more into the building technology. So in the products, and then like how does this building part deal with water and things like that, and not so much in designing and the aesthetics. I think I did learn some things about aesthetics in this in being in architecture for 7 years, but in the end I graduated my master in building technology, and I thought, okay, so then I'll work somewhere where someone is needed that does building technology, making the calculations.
Quite important as well.
Also, yes.
Yeah.
And in my studies, I was really enjoying myself in the students' union and organizing things. And also in the building technology master, there was a lot of group work. So I really enjoyed that. And then I went to work at a small architectural firm. And the idea was that I would make calculations and do tender documents and write all these specifications. And then I got really
Bored.
unhappy really quickly.
Oh,
So
wow.
there wasn't enough sort of people interaction. And I hadn't realized, and that's, I think, very typical for a lot of technical surroundings, I hadn't realized as a person what would give me energy. Like I'd like making the sums, but the balance in my life was very much also with people, working with people. So then through some self-exploration and talking to people, they were like, you should be in project management or something. So, and that's where I was very lucky. I got to interview at the government agency for buildings in Holland, and I got hired as an assistant project manager. And of course, there the people part is, and the managing the processes part is a very big part of the job. And then I grew from junior to meteor to almost senior project manager, I would say. I was like getting to 30. And that's where I did realize, like, oh, this whole, because I was in a program with a trainer and a coach, and I was having my own coaching on the side. And also when I was a project manager, really being the chair of the team and being the person that would be responsible for paying the advisors and having the budgets and the plannings. I also felt a bit insecure sometimes, like, who am I as a 30-year-old girl, I felt like back then, to tell these 56-year-old men that are more experienced, where to go or what to do, and of course that's not totally project management, but I was insecure, and the coaching and training helped me. So that's when I started getting really fascinated. I started to do my first schooling and coaching, and then realized, oh, I wouldn't mind doing this for a job, I think. And then at some point I transferred from project management into coaching and training.
Just realized that my battery of the computer is low and it wasn't plugged in correctly.
No worries. Yeah.
So I have a question, and a question we did not discuss before. You got coaching and you had your own mentor when you were around 30 years old, you just said.
Yeah.
Is that something typical for the Netherlands? Because in Austria, at least, people from my age, I don't think we're the same age, that's not something that happened. Not where I worked. It was like, you're an engineer, figure it out. Personal stuff, forget it. Just push through. And even the words coach and mentor already had that kind of woo-woo factor. So how is that something typical for the Netherlands, that people are interested in personal development?
I think that has been changing over the years a lot. But I think Holland, I do a lot of company programs with European offices, or even American, but lately more European offices. And we see a difference very much so. So you have the timeline, like when I was 30, that's like 17 years ago, in a lot of technical surroundings, it wasn't so common yet. But I was working for the government, and there it was really
It
common.
was
So every
okay.
project, everyone that was responsible for a project would go through a program. And it was
Nice.
about project management, but it was also about yourself, and it was
Hmm.
about getting to know yourself, and you got coaching and all that things.
Hmm.
So I was, and I think if you back then you worked at a consultancy firm or something, you would also have gotten that.
Hmm.
But like if you work
Okay.
at a contractor or maybe in a
Not that
production
much.
site, not yet. It's
Yeah.
changing a lot very rapidly. The last 5 years I've worked for a lot of like big
Hmm.
contractors and big things like where
Big
they
firms.
dredge and where they drill and where they,
Hmm.
all those type of companies. But
Hmm.
also IT. IT has also been really growing that
Yeah.
they also pay attention to the personal development side. And
Yeah. It's very important.
right now in Holland, that's so much more than I have friends in England, but I also have participants in
Hmm.
France, Belgium, Germany, and some of them, I don't know, a core quadrant. You have a
Hmm.
quality, and then you have a pitfall, and then you have something that's a challenge, and then there's an allergy con. I'm very curious to hear what the listeners of this podcast recognize there. But I think most Dutch people have heard of it. Like, and the students today hear of it,
Hmm.
even in more technical studies. But then I noticed,
Interesting.
an English manager that's 45 has never heard of this concept
I
because
heard
the
about it.
training
So
and
if you're
yeah,
listening to the podcast, watching the
yeah,
podcast, so let us
yeah,
know in the comments if you've heard about this, and what
yeah.
you think about it. Interesting.
So yeah,
Hmm.
so I
So,
would love to be a bit more precise as an engineer too, but I see it's growing and there's a
hmm.
level difference between Holland and I think Holland is very much into training and coaching and feedback
It
and in
is,
other
yeah.
cultures and countries that's not always the same. Yeah.
And it's changing. Company cultures are changing as well, and it's
Also in other
finally,
countries, of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
finally apparent that it is necessary. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that leads us directly to my first in-depth
Yes.
question. So as we already said, as engineers, we focus on technical problems and the solutions.
Yeah.
So we're kind of single-minded sometimes, like problem and we want to solve it. But
Yes.
emotional intelligence is not something that we are taught at school, at
Mm.
university at all. So how do you help engineers to recognize the importance of emotional intelligence
Mm.
and what are the first steps to that someone can take to integrate that into their personal lives? Because as I already said, everything that has to do with at least my generation,
Mm-hmm.
everything that's remotely has to do with feelings, it's already woo woo. It's just push through, do
Yeah.
your job. But how do you teach engineers that it's actually important?
Hmm. Yeah. So I think it is very clear, like you said, a lot of the attention in the beta corner in STEM
In the
fields
STEM
goes to
corner?
the content and to the
Hmm.
expertise. And then we love as engineers our challenging puzzles there and we want to solve
Hmm.
things like you said. But I would say human interaction is part of that puzzle because
Hmm.
we can have like a really quality content expertise and a good plan or a beautiful product, but if we cannot get people on board or enthusiastic about that,
Hmm.
or if we are in a project teams and people are having trouble working together because they don't get each other, then that's where all the energy is going to leak or when the failures are around the corner. So
Hmm.
that's one of the things that I think the emotional and the interhuman part is part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And I would say the good news is if you talk about human emotional intelligence, that's part of every human. Engineers
Hmm.
are humans. They
Really,
see
are
the
they?
eye roll, they see the eye roll. They see,
Hmm.
hey, they're not happy. They feel their own feelings. And some
Hmm.
of us are more attuned to our physical or emotional feelings than others, but we all have the capacity to feel.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's sort of the good news because we have the information we can tap into that information, and then
Hmm.
that question is, what do we do with it? So if you
Hmm.
grow up maybe in a culture or a family that doesn't talk about feelings, and then you study and it's not about feelings, and then you start working and you hear no one addressing the elephants in the rooms,
Yeah.
then that's hard. But as soon as you start seeing examples or you go in a training or a coaching and you realize, I can actually address this furthermore, I should address this because there's gonna be problems if we don't address this, or So it's about giving people more like tools. And again, a Dutch word would be handvatten as one of
Yeah.
these, but I think that also translates to tools probably.
It probably also translates to tools. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
just ways, to
Hmm.
mitigate tension in projects or in relationships or in
Hmm.
your own system.
Hmm.
So yeah. Am I
So
answering the question? Am I?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think so. No,
Yeah.
I'm sure. So if I could imagine that sometimes if not individuals come to your trainings, but maybe it's a
Yeah.
group of engineers, technicians
Yeah.
from one company,
Also.
and they
Yeah.
have to because their team leaders want them to attend that kind
Mhm.
of coaching. So
Yeah.
how do you um
Yeah.
do you have sometimes people like sitting in their arms crossed and like, I don't want to
Yeah,
be
for
here, I don't
sure.
need to be here,
Yeah.
and what's that
Yeah.
about? How do you get
Yeah.
them? How do
Yeah, to
you?
be honest, like I try to work with people that choose for it, that
Yeah.
either, or we have talent programs with the company I work with a lot,
Hmm.
Ludens Talent Development. They
Hmm.
have programs, and a lot of that is like, hey, do you want to take a next step in your career? It's within a company, but people choose.
Hmm.
That obviously really helps with the learning attitude and the urgency that people feel.
Hmm.
And sometimes it is the case that it's being said, hey, you're a leader in this company or in this department,
If
so
you want to
you
grow, you
we're
need
going to
that.
put it in your calendar. You
Yeah.
have to be there.
Yeah.
So it has happened in the past, not so much anymore. I think somehow like some type of interest, and especially younger people, they almost expect it and they want to.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, but yeah, what's really given me always, how do you say it? So for me as a person, I think it's difficult when people go like that.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I tend, my human nature also sometimes tends to try to convince them,
Hmm.
and that's not always the way. But I've never had really, really difficult interactions there where you feel
There's a
like
lot of
someone is
resistance and
totally not on board, I
yeah.
guess, or
Yeah.
almost never. And sometimes what's really cool is that people are expressing their doubts, and that's fine,
Hmm.
because that's also, then you're engaged, right? So if they
Yeah.
say, I don't really get this, or I don't see why this is necessary, or I couldn't see this going, and then sometimes in the group, other people start experimenting, and then they see, I do now see how it works.
Hmm.
So that's why groups are sometimes so cool, because then people can see with each other. And sometimes it's not the timing. And then half a year later, I get an email from a
They're coming
participant and
back.
say, remember when I was really doubting and now I'm doing this method and
Hmm.
it's working for me and I want to let you know.
Oh, that's
Not
nice that you,
everyone does
yeah.
that, of course,
No, no,
but
no.
here
But
and now.
sometimes, yeah.
So that's really fun, and that makes it yeah, that
Hmm.
gives, because sometimes I start doubting, like, am I bringing it across in the correct way or
Right.
something, and then I get emails like that, and then I'm like, people
Oh,
need
yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and sometimes things land later or they might not. That's
Also
in
okay
essence, I
sometimes.
try
Yeah.
to just be fine with that also.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that you like if people voice their doubts because I have the same thing in my
Hmm.
coachings and trainings. And I just remembered one lady, and she really sat in the group course, arms
Yeah.
crossed, and everybody was introducing themselves, and she just sat there and said, "I hate English." And that was the first thing she said in
Yeah.
the English course the company paid for, and I like it because then I know where I can start working with that person
Hmm.
because it's not
Yeah, what's,
grammar that I
yeah.
have to work on with her. It's her resistance towards the
Yeah,
language.
sure.
And if I
Yeah.
can explain grammar to her in the most easiest and simplest way, it doesn't work
Yeah.
for her. That's not her
Yeah, it's
where I
not the
need
channel you
to
have to tune
put my
in.
tools on. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's interesting. So
Yeah, I wouldn't say I totally like it, like my,
no, that's a strong
but
word, but it's
I did. This is also sort of reframing. I had to learn that that is interest too. So I had to
yeah,
really learn to work with that, and also be okay with someone not being as interested, or yeah, yeah,
yeah. Sometimes comes later. So we mentioned that being aware of feelings and intuition has,
yes,
you said that has helped you in your leadership roles
yes,
and then with your coaching. And
yeah,
for engineers, maybe those who are our age and older, the younger
mm,
generations are more they're
mm,
cooler with those terms. But for us oldies, and we're not used to thinking in those terms.
yes.
what's a practical way?
Yeah.
What do you teach them? What's a practical way how they can start to pay more attention to the human element in their projects and teams?
Yes. Yes. Well, one thing is that you listener,
Yeah.
but engineers, people in STEM already notice a lot. And then the question is, what do you do with it, of course?
Mhm.
So, where you sometimes notice someone giving an eye roll, maybe after go and say, or maybe in the meeting say, what do you think? You know?
Mhm.
So it's following the cues that you already see.
Mhm.
And sometimes that takes a bit of slowing down and
Mhm.
reflecting on things and going like, hey, if I look back on that meeting, what happened? What did I see? Because sometimes I think people always want to act in the moment, but that's not always necessary or possible. So
Mhm.
just the cues that you got, what do you still want to do with them or could you do with them?
Mhm.
So that's one of the things I think, just noticing. And that's in the body language of other people, maybe their tone of voice or when they talk really fast, or you can hear it in people's voices when there's tension. I always say system because it's not just the body, it's the mind, and the whole thing sort of is connected to each other. And involuntarily, not people are not aware always. But
Mhm.
when people start talking like that, they're pissed off,
Yeah,
So
they most
these
definitely are.
cues you can
Yeah.
notice, and in
Mhm.
yourself, of course. So and that's what's sometimes difficult about it. We resonate with each other, so things are a little bit
Mhm.
contagious sometimes. But
Mhm.
calm is also contagious. So just
And
looking
joy
at
is
these signs
contagious.
in
Mhm.
other people, in yourself, and then being curious. So the curiosity that you have as an engineer,
Mhm.
how is this made? What's going on? What's going
It's
on
it's
is a
just
is a
another
beautiful
system to
question.
solve. Yeah. So when you said you're also working with international
Yes.
clients, and you said you have to sit, what you just said, like in a meeting, you can sit back
Yeah.
and watch how is somebody expressing themselves. How are
Mm.
they talking with clenched
Yeah.
teeth? Are they talking very fast? Are they relaxed? So,
Mm.
do you teach your clients about cultural differences as well?
Mm.
Because I could imagine that a German, or maybe let's say even somebody from Switzerland, super cool, super relaxed,
Yeah.
having a discussion or meeting with somebody from
Yeah.
Mexico,
Yeah.
it could be misinterpreted.
Yes, for sure.
Even Austrians and Italians, that could be misunderstandings.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things that I was wondering if we would address it. That a lot of
Mhm.
things are about assuming, and if we have different cultural codes, we have different assumptions about what
Mhm.
people mean and
Mhm.
don't mean. So
Mhm.
that's always a challenge. But I
Yeah.
moved from Amsterdam to Den Bosch, which is an hour south, and it's different. You know, when people say the same sentence, they mean something slightly different
Right.
sometimes. There's a
Mhm.
different sense of humor, there's a different way of making connections. So yeah, that always plays in all human interaction, and for
Mhm.
sure between there's a cultural difference between engineers and salespeople.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, even
So
sales engineers. Yeah.
sales engine, yeah, so that also, and of course South America and Europe, so we do talk about it, and I think especially when we are in groups, we talk about how we should keep talking about it.
Mhm.
That we need to keep checking, like I'm assuming this. And I think building relationships, taking time to get to a place where you sort of know and trust each other, makes how do you say it, more space for, if you don't understand, that you stay curious and you're like, what, sorry, I thought you meant this, but maybe that
Mhm.
space, again, you need a little bit of slowing down. That's
Mhm.
a challenge for me usually myself as well.
Me
Slowing
too.
down and noticing, like, hey, what am I hearing? What do they maybe mean? And what
Mhm.
could be the cultural component?
Mhm.
What could be the interpersonal, my personal character and their
Yeah.
character opponent? And sometimes people feel that slowing down and double checking and asking that actually extra curious question is delaying things. But
No,
actually, because you have less misunderstandings, of course,
you're
yeah, maybe it's
saving
cliche, yeah,
time
but
and
in the
energy
end, you're
and
going to
money
be
in the
more
long term.
effective. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sorry,
true.
you said
Some people might think that it costs time, all those
yes.
extra clarifying
Yeah,
questions, but in the long run, on the long term, you're saving time, money, energy, troubles,
sure.
a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you said, the creating a personal connection with your coworkers,
Hmm.
that serves as the basis, as the foundation to be feel free to ask a clarifying question. Because if
That's
you're
it.
afraid, I think of not even afraid, but if you have more than a healthy amount of respect or fear from another
Yeah.
coworker or client,
Yeah.
you don't feel at ease to say, sorry, did I understand you right? Did I
Yes.
get that
Yeah.
right? Or by saying this, do you mean that? And yeah.
Yeah. This is there's so many thoughts going in my head
Oh,
about
go
this
on.
theme because I'm working with a lot of trainees now,
Mm-hmm.
and they're 25, 24, 23, and they are coming into a workforce space. They have a totally different rhythm, but they don't always know what's expected of them, and they don't always know what's okay to ask. And then they get a bit hesitant, especially if you're one of those engineers that wants to be 200% sure
Correct.
before
Yeah.
you. That's not possible in a new working
Mm-hmm.
environment. And for some of them, and that's where I recognize, for instance, my partner, like when he was younger, it's also like, okay, work is work, private is private, and that's a fine division. But at the same time, like my partner has discovered over the years, and they are also discovering that if there's no relationship, there is less easy working together.
Yeah.
So you have to also invest in, and it doesn't always have to be what did you do in your weekend, or endless coffee chats, but there is a way where you can be sort of at least interested in the whole person
Mm-hmm.
and spend time on that. And then you will, like you said, will probably be more comfortable reaching out, but they will also be more comfortable reaching out to you or explaining something extra or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. I just thinking back to the conversation we had a month or two ago when we
Yes.
first connected, and I was telling you all those stories with my my history of learning Dutch and all the things that I said incorrectly in the beginning. And that
Yeah.
sometimes there were people who were not correcting me because they didn't
Mm.
know me well enough, and they didn't
Mm.
know, they didn't.
Dutch people not correcting you? That's surprising.
Yeah, looking back, it is very surprising. But
Yeah.
I mean, they did correct me on a lot of levels, but a couple of things they did not.
Mm.
And it took a couple of years to make one friend who is also a grammar school teacher. And
Mm.
she even interrupted me in my sentences in
Mm.
public and corrected my pronunciation, tiny grammar
Yeah.
things. And other people around us were like, oh, you can't correct her, that's so rude. And she was like, no,
Mm.
Olivia likes that, but she took the time to get to know me,
Yeah.
and she knew from me that I don't mind being corrected in
Yeah.
public
Yeah.
about grammar and stuff, about things that I'm really wrong. I don't like being corrected in public about things that I'm not wrong, that I know I'm right about.
How dare
That I'm
you?
like, out. Now I'm like, if you don't not know more about a topic than I do,
Yeah.
then just don't
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah.
Kind of arrogant sometimes. No,
And
but I
where
really
you're
like
from?
being. Pardon?
And where you're from culturally, yeah, is that sort of part of the norm to say something or shut up or?
No, depends on the setting and depends very much on the hierarchy.
Mm.
So Austria is a very I hate that word in English.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very hierarchical country.
Yes.
So you never correct upwards. So you don't correct your boss, of course, never in public. Um, Downwards, like in the hierarchy, it's okay. But then again, I have to add as a side note, I left Austria 14 years ago, and things are
Yeah,
always changing.
sure.
So maybe that has changed as well. But by 2011, that was pretty much the standard back then.
Mm.
You correct very harshly downwards, but not upwards, the hierarchy.
Yep.
And there is a book, I think I mentioned it in every single podcast, the Culture Map by Erin Meyer.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
really,
yeah.
yeah,
I have it.
it's,
Yep.
and it's really interesting
Yeah.
because I forgot that I was already Dutchified. I was integrated into the Dutch culture, that I forgot how harshly German speakers correct.
Mm.
And I got a feedback from a German client. And I was like, whoosh, that's not only harsh, that is rude to
Mm.
to the 10th. It was unbelievable. And
Mm.
but that was what you said. You have to know yourself a little bit to understand others better. So I was
Yeah.
like, I took myself back and I thought, wait, let's just look up in that book, The Culture Map, how the Germans criticize. And I went to that chapter and I was like, okay, she wasn't rude. It was just a German way.
Yeah.
It is like overemphasizing negative things so that you get understood better.
Yeah.
So even if you're out of a country for a couple of years, you kind of forget your own cultures. It's always good to check in.
Yeah.
And what triggers me, then I know what could trigger others.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. Yeah, criticism. I like being how do you say that? I like to learn. So I very much I'm happy if people dare to tell me what I said wrong, did wrong. I'm not that easily offended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have quite a strong inner critic, so
Yes.
and my suspicion is that most engineers, because it has to do with a certain way of looking for faults and sort of, I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if most engineers, I don't know these things.
A
But
lot of.
so criticism usually is like, oh, I have to really brace myself and then sort of, and I figure it out in the end.
Mhm.
But because I'm already the sort of strict on myself, it can be a bit tricky. But I want to learn for sure. And if someone has been affected in any negative way or positive way
Oh,
by
of course,
what
yeah.
I've done, I want to hear, of course. But and at the same time, there's something in my system a bit like, yeah.
Yeah.
But
And
it's always okay in the end.
and when I was younger, I also thought that I have to do something with every single feedback that I
Yeah,
get. So it
sure.
took me
Yeah.
a while to come to that point where I said, okay, thank you for the feedback. I will think about it, and then it is my decision if I do something with that feedback.
Yeah.
But that took, I think, until 30, 32. Sometimes feedback is just what it is. You can
True. Yeah.
just archive it.
Thank you. Next.
Thanks. Exactly. Smile away. Yeah. So, communication as a leadership tool. So if you're an engineer, the lonely wolf kind of that goes into your cubicle and you just do your calculations and you're not a leader, so maybe your communication skills don't have to be super duper. Maybe it's okay to think in zeros and ones. But if you want to be a team leader, project leader, even if you're working with just two other people or one other person, you have to be able to communicate. In your experience, what are the most common communication challenges that engineers face when they are managing teams or projects? And then the second level of that question, when they manage international or multicultural teams.
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to the assumptions.
Mm.
I think I don't want to repeat myself, but at the same time, this is such a huge part. The assumptions, we all make them, and judgments, we all make them. I don't like it when people say we don't judge. Of course, we judge all day. We sort of, you put things in brackets and corners, and you're like, that is that, and that is that. That behavior I don't like, that I do. And we have to look beyond them and be clear on, what actions do we take on after our judgments and assumptions, So I think that's a really important one, that we stay curious, basically, that we take a step back and we keep asking questions. Did we understand, what did you actually mean? What would help? What, if people have a lot of resistance, then ask them what would change this resistance. Just and I think there's a way where we can make those conversations, how do you say it, a bit more explicit. We can we can say, hey, I'm not sure about what I'm going to about where we're going with this project. I'm sure about this, but I'm not sure about this part. You don't have to be totally like, but you can be like, I'm not sure about this part. How do you feel about that? We can give a bit more subtitles sometimes, like, I want to tell you something that I think you might not agree with. Can we have a discussion, instead of just going in it? And what we do is we overthink, how are we going to convince? We can show our cards a lot more than we usually do, I think.
But showing cards, that is about trust.
Yeah. And how do you build trust? By giving trust. So this is what I see a lot in the groups that we work with, that sometimes at the beginning, which makes sense, they are a little bit more holding back and not
Mhm.
sure. And then we do certain things together where we sort of force a little bit like, hey, tell us about something that you find difficult. And then they tell us, and then everyone's like, oh, I have that too, or I have a different thing, but I understand.
Mhm.
And then in the end, they go like, yeah, but these are really nice people, and
Mhm.
I got to know them really well. And it's like, yeah, sometimes you have to show your cards first, you know?
Mhm.
And that's scary. And if it's an unsafe, it's a bit of a difficult word. I think people are using it sometimes a bit too quickly now. But
It's
if
true.
it is not the safest or the most comfortable environment, I understand. But I've worked for so many years with people that would say, I won't say this to my team, or I won't say this to my manager. It's not gonna. And then we would practice and work on it and see. And then they would, and it would turn out okay. They
Yeah.
wouldn't always change the full situation, but they would at least be, how do you say it, acting in a way that aligns with how they
With their
felt.
mhm. With
And that
their
would make them
values.
sleep better. And
Yeah.
sometimes the other person would really get it, and sometimes the other person would not. But I don't know
Mhm.
if I'm talking too abstract here, but I
No,
think it's,
not for me. Yeah,
yeah,
and
there's
actually,
examples to mention, but when I
mhm.
once I get into examples. But
Another
so that's
podcast
one of the
maybe.
things. So the showing your cards here and there, being curious about other people's, you can ask, what is this like for you? I think a lot of smart people are also very used to think for the other person. And
Yeah.
there's a way where you can get really ahead like that because you take into account things. But sometimes this is your chair, this is theirs. If you
Mhm.
keep sitting on their chair for them, go
That's
back to your place
yeah
and ask them, what is this like for you?
for you. Mhm.
And instead of thinking, oh, they will probably say this and do that and think that,
Mhm.
and I'm talking quite general. I think leaders should do this, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think any person can benefit from knowing that, from
Yeah.
noticing that.
Mhm.
And I have another, but I don't know in time, like I have a model in mind that also popped up, but I don't know
No, go ahead. Go
time-wise.
ahead. Go ahead. We just
Another
make a
thing I
longer
think,
podcast.
a very basic model we use a lot is about content, or how do you say that? Communication levels. So
Mhm.
you can be on the level of the content.
Mhm.
You can think of a little iceberg with a water line, and then the content is above water. It's the
Mhm.
part of the iceberg. Icebergs is
That you
used
see.
a
Mhm.
lot as a metaphor. And that's where we tend to talk in a STEM working environment. Content, the
Like
plan, the
facts
product,
and
the thing.
context. Yeah.
And then there's a level that's different from that. It's the more the procedure, more the process level. It's a little bit on the waterline, you could say,
Mhm.
because some of it is insight. There's an agenda for the meeting,
Mhm.
or what points will we discuss, or it's very clear who has which role and everything like that. But sometimes one person thinks we are in a brainstorm meeting and another person thinks we're going to take a decision today or wants it to be decided today. That sort of procedural process miscommunications or
Mhm.
it's good to figure that out and to be more explicit, like what is actually
Mhm.
what we're doing here, how much time are we taking,
Mhm.
who's taking notes, that sort of that. um how much talking time does everyone get, or things like
Oh
that,
yeah.
or
Just being very, very clear about
yeah,
things.
on the process level, not on the
Yeah.
content level. So,
Yeah.
and then underwater, what we don't normally discuss, but what plays a huge role is the relationship and the interaction you have with each other, the history you have with each other, the emotions that come up with on the
Mhm.
topic. And we don't always, we don't have to turn any business meeting in the therapy session,
No, no, no.
but you could see it almost also as, if you hear the same content level arguments being repeated and people still don't get each other, you
Mhm.
could check, hey, are we on the process level, are we aligned? And if then still, then you could check, like, what's going
I'll be on the
on. And
emotional level
sometimes
aligned.
maybe
Mhm.
not in the meeting with the group, but maybe with individual persons before or after meetings, or sort of, yeah, just be curious and maybe you can ask people like, hey, how
Mhm.
do you feel about this? Or if the feeling word is a bit too scary, you can also say, how do you think about this? And usually you get
Yeah.
some of that stuff as well.
Because thinking is the thing we do. We're thinking it.
But also revealing, like, hey, I'm noticing we're talking in circles, I'm
Yeah.
feeling uncomfortable with that. So
In
so
your
that
ex
sort of
mhm.
level thing is a good thing to keep in mind,
Mhm.
I think.
That's a really I just wrote that down for myself when I was
Yeah.
drawing that iceberg on the waterline. So it's content, process, and relationships.
CPR, that's the fun.
Oh, it's called CPR.
The
That's
CPR. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
how do you call it?
yeah,
Like reviving somebody, giving him a heart massage, CPR.
yeah.
Oh, I love that. CPR, I learned something new. In what I just wanted to ask you, in your experience, that asking for clarification, is that easier or more difficult if you have to speak in another language? So if it's
Oh
all
yeah,
Dutch
for sure.
people and
Yeah.
there's way more assuming going on, or if it's like
Yeah.
five different people at a meeting, everybody has a different native
Yeah.
language and they have to speak in English. Is it
Yeah.
easier to ask for clarification in English,
Sure.
like in a not native language, or?
And again, and I don't want to minimize the cultural differences between countries, but again, a CEO and a CTO or the
Mhm.
CFO, there's also
Different
sometimes
language.
that.
Yeah.
Of course, so I don't know if you can sort of go like if it's and a different field and a different language and a different age, because ages they also matter because languages
Oh yeah.
change, very young people and ethics and all
Hmm.
these things. So I of course it's a huge part. So I would think it needs a bit of extra time and again slowing things down and sometimes really coming back on things like, hey, last time we discussed this and then I realized I took it as that, but is
Hmm.
that what you got away from that as well? Just so all these sort of extra checking
Hmm.
um, things.
It
And what I think it pays off very quickly. If you do that for a while, I see that with my international groups, then in the end, it doesn't need that much checking
no.
because you're gonna understand
Sometimes it's
each
just
other.
one look and then you know you're talking about the same thing.
Also,
Yeah.
yeah,
But it
yeah,
does need a certain level of self-awareness
sure.
to do that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
maturity. But on the other hand, if you're not self-aware and you're not a mature person, you're probably not ending up in a leadership role or shouldn't. So,
Well,
okay, yeah.
maturity is
Well,
an interesting concept, because we all
yeah.
have parts. Like me too. We all have parts that are very underdeveloped
Hmm.
and parts that are really developed and matured.
I
So,
mean,
but we
just
all
take an
have our,
apple. You can eat the one side and the other side is already the one side is ripe and the other side is already gone, and there's still a
yeah,
green part. So even an apple can have different levels of
yeah, yeah.
maturity.
So
Yeah,
we all have our, and it's good to be aware of that and to be
yeah.
mindful of that and to be gentle with ourselves and other people.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, set boundaries because sometimes if people have a certain less mature side and they lash out or something, then
Hmm.
it's good to be. I would say it's part of the human. I don't know a lot of people that are mature on
Oh,
all sides of. What helps
no.
if is there sort of a main sort of part that can be like,
Yes,
hey, this
yes.
part of me, I don't know, what you
My
said,
public
sort of.
persona is quite mature, not my
That's
private one.
helpful.
That helps, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so, I
Hmm.
had just had a complete different thought in my mind, but I came up with
Me too.
maturity
I
and
was like,
mind.
oh, we have to go back to the.
Okay, you know what? Remember yours. I tell my
Yeah.
side story and you
Yeah.
tell your side story, and then we go back to the main questions. I was just thinking about sometimes, especially engineers or technicians, they say, "Oh, we're not that into feelings. It's all about facts and numbers." And
Mm,
then I always, even
mm,
with if I have sometimes it comes up with my English groups as well because it's all about
mm.
communication, and especially
Yeah.
if I have a group with a high English level where it's not about grammar anymore and vocabulary, it's really about
Mm.
communication. And sometimes, yeah, we're not emotional. And then I say, have you ever been on a site meeting and your foreman was screaming
Yeah.
or the site manager was screaming? Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
that's engineering. It's like, that's an emotion. That's an emotion. So
Yeah.
I argue that engineers are, especially in construction, it's a very emotional
Mm.
um,
The
work
pressure is
field.
high.
The pressure is high. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why I always then they all kind of shut up normally, like, oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's so helpful. Like emotions are so helpful in the sense that when I was a project manager, when things didn't sit right with me, I knew I was missing information.
Yep.
So for me, that would sometimes express like stress and sort of being a bit more easy, crying a little bit more
Hmm.
easy, but that and we are a bit like, oh, crying, and I didn't cry in meetings, but I could
No.
notice when for me things got shaky,
Yeah.
that meant things were off. So that meant
Hmm.
I had to pay extra attention. What am I missing? What information don't I have? What do I need? Who
Hmm.
do I need to talk to? And for other people, they might start feeling a bit suspicious. Everyone has their own little mechanics when stress rises. And what I think, and that was where my thought was going, and I don't want to do the whole explanation, but what I've been working with lately, which is so helpful, is somatic experiencing. And this is really
Oh,
about the
yeah.
workings of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we can go to feelings in a woo-hoo vague way, like what do you want to tell your inner child, which honestly I work with as well, if
Yeah.
people are open for it.
But for that.
But it doesn't have to have that language.
Mm-mm.
But tensions in our bodies arise. We have an activation, deactivation, activation. That's the nervous system. That's
Mm-hmm.
all animals, and
Mm-hmm.
we are animals. Biologically, that happens. And then if we get too activated, we have
Mm-hmm.
ways of sort of, how do you say that, unloading that tension,
Yeah.
and there's ways where we don't totally get down anymore, and then we get into that's when in the end we get in burnout and things like that. But we can surf those waves of tensions, and it's very technical. It's blood pressure, it's muscle
Mm-hmm.
tension, it's having your stomach feel like it's in a knot. That makes total
Yeah.
sense. If we are in a stressed program, then our digestion is going to stop. So yeah, I sometimes I get overexcited on this end of things. But what I want
Yeah.
to say is that we can work very constructively with feeling our physical feelings and actually processing them and letting go of
Mm-hmm.
them again, and having more resilience
Mm-hmm.
in our daily life, in our work, in our being. We all know what it feels like to get stressed and sort of get into a sort of tunnel vision and not see solutions anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
the difference that is, if we are more relaxed and we feel a bit more connected to
Mm-hmm.
our calm, and we have oversight, and we go between those states, but we can work with those states, and we
Mm-hmm.
can actually make sure that we are a bit more in the relaxed state.
Mm-hmm.
Very, yeah, very technically we can work on that, which I
Yeah.
love as an
Mm-hmm.
engineer.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
just thinking about wording, because
Mm.
whenever the word feel or feeling comes in, a
Yeah.
lot of technicians like they um take a step back.
Mm.
But what I hear very often is something's off. That's an
Mm.
expression that I hear very often from my clients. Like,
Yeah.
I thought something's off. And
Yeah.
it's actually quite a technical description, quite a technical way to say it's not feeling right.
Yeah.
And then
Like
you
into, yeah.
investigate and yeah,
Sorry?
intuition. And then you start investigating. I was
Yeah,
just thinking back
exactly.
whenever I had to do
Yeah.
checking big invoices from the construction
Mm.
firms, but 100,000 and million of euros. And
Mm.
sometimes I had a feeling that something is off. It's
Yes.
like a feeling that the numbers are not adding
Yeah.
up correctly. And then
Yeah.
you start investigating. And
Yeah.
then you call that construction firm and say, hey, what do you want me to pay? That was not actually in the... And then they, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, sorry, yeah, oops, mistake. But it always starts with that feeling that something's off.
Yes. And that feeling is the summation of you knowing things, history, past, expertise.
Exactly.
Because I think
Intuition.
intuition is some people make it into this weird thing where an intuition, if you follow your intuition, your
No,
dreams will come
it's
true. And
expertise. That would be
it's
a better word.
if you
Experience.
follow sort of your inner, yeah, then
Yeah.
that, and then sometimes things still don't turn out right, but you
No.
usually don't lose sleep over it. And this is where, if people say I felt it was wrong and I still did it, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're bummed,
Yeah.
and the gut feeling, I think a lot of engineers also know that the gut
Yeah.
feeling, yeah, it's a very common thing to experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, interesting, interesting. Um, I have another question regarding your personal journey with coaching.
Yes.
So you're a fellow engineer turned coach, like myself. Different. We have the same kind of clients, but we do different things with them.
Yeah.
I found that moving away from a technical role into coaching also required for myself a shift in mindset. Um,
Yes.
can you maybe share a moment from your own journey where you felt that transition and how it shaped the way how you are coaching your engineers today?
That second part I'm not sure about yet, but the
Just
first part,
let's
what
start with the
comes up
first.
is, yeah, oh, probably, um, the entrepreneurial side, basically. So I was a project manager working for the government, and I quit at some point, and I took some time, and then I presented myself as a coach and trainer, and I did studies for that, and I had practice clients, and I had to get into that. So that took a while. But then coming sort of that sales side, yeah, as an engineer, like I still sometimes cringe when I've talked about it in my social media when I write a LinkedIn post like, look, this person has been really helped. They are now more able to cope with their responsibilities, or they feel a lot clearer, or they are more accepted as a leader, or
Mhm.
whatever is going on. But yeah, there that, and I blame that on the side of me. I think culturally and in engineering surroundings, and maybe it's also a little bit Dutch. That it's a
A
little
little
bit
bit.
showing off, and I have to be visible. I have to show myself. Well, this podcast is one of the things. No, part of me thinks, are people gonna agree? Things like that. So I
That's
felt,
their feelings. You can.
yeah, sure, sure, sure. I'm all
A
right with
wise
them.
person told me.
Yeah, I don't follow those thoughts as much, but I do
Yeah.
still come up. Let's say
Yeah.
it like that. So I think this, and I could see also that I had friends that were not in STEM fields or not technically trained, and they would like and they would share. And then I
Mhm.
had best friends that are engineers, and they were like, "Do you want me to like your LinkedIn post?" No, that's
That's too
ridiculous.
much.
That's
That's ridiculous.
fake, you know?
Yeah.
So this is a very extreme example,
Hmm.
but that, I think that from sort of having to be visible, show yourself,
Hmm.
tell about yourself, and sort of, um, yeah, I think that's like the rational part of me had some trouble with
Yeah.
that. When is
And
it bragging? When is it, you know?
as an engineer, you have the stuff that you built speaking for you. It's literally somewhere in the landscape. There's that bridge, there's that tunnel, there's that sewer system that that you finish. That's the project that speaks for you and your
Yeah,
reputation. And as a coach, you kind of constantly have to put out the testimonials of your clients
yeah.
yourself.
You
And that
as a
sounds,
person, I am my
yeah,
product, actually.
yes,
Yeah, that's a
exactly.
bit
And that
weird.
feels
Yeah.
weird in the beginning. That is true. Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah.
me, another mind shift thing was moving away from perfection, from the idea of perfection.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh
and
yeah.
and that everything has um the German word is quotient. So brain freezing now. So everything has to be not only safe and calculated, but it has to be
Hmm.
double safe or 1.5 safety
Yes.
um
Check, double check.
calculation check,
Yeah.
double check. And we even had a teacher at schools in Austria. One is the best mark you can get, and five is the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a teacher, he only gave out ones and fives because he said in real life, if your bridge collapses, you
Yeah,
cannot
of
say, but my
course.
calculation
It's
was a
not a
three.
three.
He said it stands or it collapses. There's nothing in
Yeah.
between.
Yeah.
And that was drilled into us. That is,
Yeah.
it's if you're not perfect, people will die. And
Yeah.
that was and
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, that makes for um
I think I got
a
that
lot of
already a little bit in
anxiety.
my first job, going from building technology master
Hmm.
to project management in the government. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, I thought and I think a lot of students have that going into jobs, any academic, also Alpha, that you go into, so other types of studies.
Yeah,
If you go into work, it's like disappointing, but
it
also
is.
surprising, like, oh, they don't know what they're doing here either. I thought we were going to make the best quality, but he doesn't like him, and the last time they worked on a project, so they're not listening to each other. Things like
Yes.
that was very baffling to me, but that also was part of what you're describing a little bit. I had to
Hmm.
let go of that. And I just realized the second part of your last question. I was just thinking it did change the way that I work with people, but it was a little bit from the start. But I think some, like if you look at the introvert extrovert spectrum, so
Hmm.
you could say that in general, no, it's hard. I think there's a lot of extroverted engineers as well. But if you look at sort of visibility, like in
Hmm.
companies right now, it's also important. Like you can do the work, but are you going to get credits for the work? Are people seeing that you're doing the work? So
Hmm.
I think it made me understand also a little bit more, because I think I was quite extroverted as an employee. I was really visible. But
Hmm.
for me, the entrepreneurship took it to a whole different level. But it
Yes.
makes me understand a bit more. And also, I think also we don't have to become extroverts or something like that if we're more introverted, but that whole tension between I want people to see my work, but I don't want to be a loudmouth or shouting, or I don't want to overstep
Mhm.
anyone else's boundaries. We work with that a lot with people in my
Mhm.
groups and individual. Um, yeah, and that I understand a bit better, and we look for ways where they can do that without having to become something that they don't want to be,
That
I
is
guess.
so important.
Yeah.
That is such an important, I love that sentence. We don't have to become somebody we don't want to be. And that's also if I have that with my clients. So they come with
Mm.
their identity in their mother language. And
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like they have to change their identity in English, but they don't
Yes.
have to.
No.
And even if but that's cultural translation as well. Standard example, I use it so often, is emails. They're so short. And if you're dealing with English or American customers or US
Mm.
customers, you need those. The Germans and Austrians always call it the slimy sentences at the beginning of emails,
Yeah.
like, hey, how you doing? So, and then with one of the last courses, oh, no, not the one of them, it's already a year ago already. We were talking about writing emails, and a Polish uh, client or engineer who was at the course, he wrote an email answer and he just said, "Hi, John, I can't do that. I don't have time," which sounds super rude to um
Yeah.
no for a US customer. And then we were talking and discussing that, and then he
Yeah.
said, "How would a Dutch person write that?"
Mm.
And I said, "John, comma, I can't." There's like John, comma, no, full stop. They wouldn't even say I don't have the time. It's even shorter and more to the point if they know each other.
Some Dutch
Some,
people,
yeah.
yeah. Not everyone, but
No.
sure, yeah.
So that
Yeah,
was an
and in Holland
interesting.
people say, "Oh, the how are you question in America is very fake." And
Yeah, it
it's
is.
different
And
codes. It's just different.
it's a different code. And even if
Yeah.
that's exactly the words that I use with my clients, as you don't have to
Yeah.
become a different person,
Yeah.
but your "Hi, John" translates to "Dear John, how you doing?" It's just a
Yeah.
different code,
Yeah.
and you're not a different
Exactly.
person,
Yeah.
therefore. But you don't have to become a completely different person. Yeah.
Oh, and I think also if you if the how do you say that, if you feel I should be more visible, but the word visible doesn't attract, we need to find a word that you feel comfortable with and
Reframe it.
find a
Yeah.
way to express yourself in a way that feels. And also, with everything that you might be missing out on, comes on the other side is your quality that actually brings you a lot. So,
Mm.
yeah, we don't have to. That's, I think, also a saying now in Holland that engineers have to be also good leaders, super socially skilled. They have to be able to present and sell things, and you can't have five-legged sheep, is the Dutch
No, yeah.
saying. So, can we sort of help each other out and not have everything in one person?
Yeah.
That having been said, I know what you can reach when you focus on attention areas and
Mm-hmm.
when you focus on soft skills or
Yes.
whatever you want to focus on. Of course, anything can grow, but it shouldn't be expected that everything is on point at the same level. That's not
And
realistic.
there's that saying where you focus where you focus on, that part grows. You
Mm,
cannot, and focus means, if you're looking from your eye, you can only focus on one thing.
mm,
So if I focus on you now on the video, the
mm.
rest of the room, it's all like blurry. I
Yeah,
cannot
yeah,
focus on the whole room and on you on the screen. So focus by definition is one thing.
yeah. That's fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah.
That's what I always, and you can't be perfect at every little thing. There must be things that you're not good at.
And that's
Yeah.
where for me the subtitling again and the explicit, like make explicit, like, hey, this is what I'm really good at,
Hmm.
and this sometimes I miss out on. Could you help?
Hmm.
I don't know. It
Could you help
sometimes
me?
sounds a bit, I don't know, it's not cliche, I guess, but it sounds a bit weird. But if you start experimenting with that, it makes total sense. And if you do that, you give other people permission to do that, and then you change
Yeah.
the culture together.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I got quite comfortable. I once got the tip i- in regards teaching. I got tips, and somebody told me you have to be comfortable with silence.
Mm.
And the advice was that if someone doesn't answer a question immediately,
Mm.
don't start talking. Just sit back and give them time. So that was a really good tip. And another one I got, and I think I got quite comfortable with it, at least what friends tell me, is to just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. No, I never thought about that. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
have an opinion right now on that.
Yeah, let me think about it,
Let me
or
think
talk to
about it.
people about it, come back. Yeah.
Yeah. But maybe,
That's showing my cards. That's an example from me of showing your cards,
yeah.
and that builds trust. That doesn't negate trust, I don't think. It shouldn't.
No, it shouldn't. True.
Yeah.
Saskia,
Yes.
if listeners now think, whoa, I want to work with Saskia, or at least I want to check out her website, I want to get in
Yeah.
touch with her, maybe for myself, for my team, for my weird neighbor. No, just kidding. How can they reach you? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah. So of course on my website,
Mm-hmm.
saskiaslotboom.nl or .com, it's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing. Most of my website is in Dutch, but there is an English page on it as well. And you can find my contact details there.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also fill in a form, but just using the email link will work, I think, best. And reach out to me, and I'll, of course, get back to you.
Awesome. And I will put your link in the podcast description as well
Yeah.
if people want to reach out to
Yes.
you.
Thank you. And LinkedIn is also a platform I use quite frequently, so that might also be a way to reach out firstly if you want.
I hope it's okay for you, but you do have a freebie on your website that I think is worth mentioning. It
Yes,
is
great.
5 career. It's in Dutch, I have to say. Do you have it in English as well?
There's two different ones. So if you subscribe to my newsletter, which I'm not as active as I used to be, it's 5 career tips for engineers. But the other link, I think I send you, and otherwise I will, is a free reflection tool, which I'm actually a little bit more keen on sharing. It's a reflection tool where, like, we have thoughts, we have feelings, we have expectations, needs, and usually when we get in pickles, when we get in difficult situations, pickles to mention
Did
your
you read
newsletter,
my newsletter?
yes, we get them intertwined, and the reflection tool helps you to be more clear on what am I thinking, what am I feeling, what would I like, and sort of it helps you step by step, and it doesn't always solve the problem, but it helps you go from maybe tension and confusion to a bit more
Clarity.
oversight and clarity. So that's actually the one I would like to and you don't have to give your information for it, but you can just try it out and let me know how it works for you.
Awesome. So we will put that link into the podcast description as well, as also all my website links. And if you're listening to the podcast, we both of us, Saskia and me, we would appreciate if you leave a comment wherever you're listening to it, on Spotify or on Apple Podcast or on the website. Or if you're really enthusiastic, shoot us an email. I think we both always reply personally. And we love feedback. Okay, that was it for today. That was English for Engineers. Talk to you soon. Oh, and before you go, if this episode gave you something to think about, I'd really appreciate if you hit subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more engineers like you find the podcast and keeps me fueled with coffee and ideas. Want to stay in a loop? Head to my website marcode.org and sign up for the English for Engineers newsletter. I'll drop practical tips, new resources, and the occasional nerdy reference straight into your inbox. Thanks for tuning in. Talk soon.